Hello everyone, welcome to Module 6 of Cornerstone's overview of the cost data collection system. My name is Jim. I'll be your host here as we work through the final sections in the data collection instrument. These sections are equipment, consumables, and supplies, other costs, total costs, and revenues. So, starting with equipment, consumables, and supplies. CMS breaks things down into two main categories, medical equipment and supplies, and non-medical equipment and supplies. Within those categories, CMS wants to see capital versus non-capital expenditures. Now here again, CMS lays out some ground rules. First, you'll want to use your agency's guidelines to categorize goods as capital expenses versus operation expenses. And for capital expenditures, medical and non-medical equipment, CMS wants you to amortize the cost over the life of the good. For purchased capital expenditures, including both medical and non-medical equipment, CMS wants you to provide the annual depreciated value of the item. For leased capital goods and medical and non-medical equipment, the annual cost is simply the annual lease expenditures for the piece of equipment. For all of the cost categories in this section, if you have an ongoing relationship with an organization that pays this cost for your agency, report the cost here. Otherwise, do not include costs for donated items. Capital medical equipment refers to equipment that can endure repeated use. It includes, but is not limited to, defibrillators, ventilators, monitors, or power lifts. Capital non-medical equipment also refers to equipment that can endure repeated use. It includes, but is not limited to, things like computers, dispatch equipment, furniture. So with all that stated, let's go ahead and visualize this now in table format. Okay, so similarly to the other tables we created, such as the labor cost table or the vehicles table, this table here is not going to be found in the instrument. This is our interpretation of what's in there, and we've kind of brought the different pieces together in a way that we hope can make more sense for some folks. At the very top here, you see the dark blue bar, if it's a capital expenditure, and then if it's a non-capital expenditure. So those are kind of the overarching sort of categories here. And then on the far left, you see medical equipment and supplies and non-medical equipment and supplies. And as we move across here to the right, we see that there are reportable items within either one of those. So let's say that we have an item in the capital expenditure bucket, and it's a piece of medical equipment. So CMS wants to know the depreciation on that. They want to know the maintenance, certification, and service costs. And if you're a shared service, again, like a fire department-based service, CMS wants to know the cost allocation of that. Likewise, if it's a non-capital expenditure, CMS wants to know the expense. And again, if you're a shared service, they want to see the cost allocation with that. So you'll need to know here if your agency had costs associated with medications purchased for ground ambulance services. If yes, you will be asked if you are able to report these costs separately from other medical supplies and consumables. And if the answer to that is yes, you must report the total cost of medications. CMS does not want in-kind donations reported here. If you answer no, CMS will ask you to explain why. And your options will include medications are supplied by a hospital or hospitals. Costs are paid by another entity. Medications were donated or provided in kind. And then finally, that your agency does not stock medications on its ground ambulances. Moving on now to other costs, and as its name would imply, this section is designed to capture costs related to your ground ambulance operation that were not captured in other sections. CMS has broken this into two main parts, which we'll refer to here as outside contracted services. That's going to include the total costs that your agency incurred for outside contracted services for which you paid a fee. That would include labor, supplies, etc. And the other category would be other contracted services or sources of expense. And there are subcategories here of medical or ambulance related, administrative or general, and fees, fines, and taxes. We'll come back to this in a table here in a couple slides. Firstly, though, let's look at the initial category here of outside contracted services. CMS has defined these here. They want to see, first of all, is this a contracted service for your agency? If so, what's the cost? And if you're a shared service, what's the cost allocation? You can see here they're looking at billing, accounting, vehicle maintenance, repair, dispatch, call center, facilities maintenance, and IT support. Now for our next table, which is much more involved, you will be asked if your agency incurred any of the expenses listed in the categories below. And again, this is expenses that were partly or entirely related to your ground ambulance operation. And this includes the medical or ambulance related category, administrative or general, and then fees, fines, and taxes. Just another reminder here, don't report costs here if they were reported elsewhere. So a lot going on here. This is basically taken right out of the instrument in this particular case. And let's take a moment then. So just consider how the table is organized. On the left, we have our main categories. We just talked about those. Across the top, we see that there are sources. And then as we move to the right, we can see how CMS wants to know if this source applies to your agency, and if so, what the total expense is, and of course, if you're a shared service, the allocated cost. Now, CMS gets pretty specific here. For instance, about halfway down the page in the administrative or general section, we can see event/meeting costs, including meals, advertising costs, and expenses related to the board or the trustees. Further down the page in the fees, fines, and taxes section, we can see how CMS wants to identify costs related to maintaining licensure, physicals and recruiting, audits, legal fees, and so on. And of course, as a reminder for the agencies that have a parent organization, you will need to track and allocate to your NPI the portion of these costs incurred at the level of the parent organization based on your organizational approach for allocating costs to specific NPIs. Okay, now we get to total cost. There isn't much for us to discuss here in truth. This section was added by CMS as a cross-check of the total cost reported throughout the reporting tool that you're going to end up using when the time comes. The total cost you report here should include all operation and capital costs, and in this case, including costs for services not related to ground ambulance services. And finally, we arrive at revenues. So here, CMS wants to know all sources of ground ambulance revenue. This section is broken into two main parts, which we'll refer to here as billing and then all other sources. Under billing, you will be asked if you can report revenue from the payers in the table that you see on the screen. If the answer is no, you will be asked to report the approximate share of revenue from billed transports for all payers combined. As we take this table and we can see CMS is breaking it out into the normal categories here, Medicare, Medicare Advantage, so on and so forth. But they're not just stopping there. They want to see Medicaid, your Medicaid MCO plans, your TRICARE, commercial insurance, workers' comp, and patient self-pay. So you see it interesting, the second column there, how often did your agency bill? What exactly does that mean? So what CMS has done is add these qualifiers in. They're going to ask how often your agency tried to bill these payers, and the default options include never, sometimes, usually, and always. Well, never and always seem pretty cut and dry. It's not entirely clear how CMS is going to define sometimes and usually. It may ultimately be immaterial, but it is important to understand that this is something CMS is going to ask. So we would recommend that you be familiar with whatever the correct answer is here to this. If you have a billing company, talk to your billing company. If you're managing your billing in-house, make sure that you're prepared to answer these questions appropriately. For all other sources, you will be asked if your agency received any revenues from any of the sources listed in the table that we're about to look at. In this section, only revenue partly or entirely related to ground ambulance services should be reported. So if we start from the top, we can see source. That's the main thing, the main category basically that CMS is defining. And as we work across to the right, we can see CMS wants to know, did your agency receive revenue from this source? If so, CMS wants to know how much. And CMS wants to know the percentage that's attributable to ground ambulance. So we're not going to go through all of these, but there's some interesting ones in there. For instance, executive loan programs, enterprise funds and utility rates, sales of assets and services, bond or debt financing, special purpose grants, matching grants, demonstration grants. A lot of stuff going on there. So like with the other tables, we highly recommend you spend time familiarizing yourself with these different sources that CMS is listing, just to make sure that you're capturing them so that when you report, you're providing the most accurate depiction of your revenue picture. And this concludes Module 6 of our overview of the Cost Data Collection Instrument. We hope this presentation, as well as the user guide, helped to clarify some of the more challenging aspects of the data collection instrument. As new information about the program is revealed, and it will be throughout the year, we will be sure to keep our clients informed. Unfortunately, this is not a program that we can actually do for our clients. Instead, this is something each agency must tackle the best that it can. If you're not sure how to adapt your systems to track the data as required, we do recommend that you speak with your accountant, contact your EPCR vendor, make sure your billing vendor or in-house department can produce the numbers that you need. And of course, don't wait. Now is the time to move if you haven't already. Likewise, if you have questions, we encourage you, hey, send those questions our way. We may not have all the answers, but we'll do what we can to help find those answers and provide them to you. And with that, we thank you for listening, and we wish you all the best.